Hello, everyone. You're listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I'm joined by the dynamic Joe Fordyce, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer. Joe, Rick Tocchet, officially the Flyers head coach. He was introduced last Friday in a decorated press conference at the Wells Fargo Center. Joe, a big takeaway for me from that press conference was the Flyers feel like Tocchet can really help in the recruiting aspect. They're eventually going to want to spend. At some point, they will start to tap into free agency, and they think Tocchet is a guy that is well connected within the league and could draw players. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an accurate assessment that he can draw players here. I mean, if you just think back to a couple examples when he was in Arizona, the Coyotes really never went and got guys. If it wasn't a homegrown guy, they didn't really go get guys. When he was there, they got Phil Kessel. When Kessel could still score goals, when he, obviously that was like his main forte, but Kessel coming off some cups in Pittsburgh, and then they go get Phil Kessel. In Vancouver, they've acquired players and to add them to the players that came up through their system. So I absolutely think he's one of those guys. And all you really have to do is look back at what the roots are. I mean, he mentioned it during his press conference, and then on our one-on-one that we're airing this week on Sportsnet Central, that he has coached Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, those cup teams in Pittsburgh, all the players that have come along there, Jake Gensel, the list goes on and on. He coached Steven Stamkos right back when he was a rookie and a really young player in this league, and we all know what he went on to accomplish in this league. So he's super well connected with a lot of big name players, and I think that his honesty is something that players will appreciate. And it's a different type of honesty than John Tortorella, because I think we all knew that John Tortorella was an honest coach. But what struck me is a few times during Tortorella's tenure, we heard things like, I didn't get a reason why. The Sean Couturier benching is one that comes to mind. He didn't tell me why. Tocchet made a point, and everyone else that talked about Tocchet on Friday made a point to talk about how he doesn't like to go a couple days without checking in with every player. And that's he and his assistant coaches, whoever they may be. And I think that goes a long way with players, because I don't know, everybody in every aspect of life, you always feel better when the people you work with are also your friends. When you're friendly with them and it's beyond a black and white work or boss and relationship, that just makes for a better atmosphere. And I think that's exactly what Toc brings here, because the one thing I will say is, when you're around him, he seems so regular. It doesn't seem like, I'm a coach, you're the media. It would be, I'm a coach, you're the play. It doesn't seem like that. He's just, he just is a regular guy. Now, I worked with him for a while, so I know him in a little bit of a different capacity, but I would say the same when I work with him. I mean, this is a guy who's, one of his best friends is Wayne Gretzky, and it's not, he doesn't act like he has that stature in the league, but yet when you talk to other people, they talk about his stature in the league and his and being that down to earth, I think it's perfect for hockey, because in my experience, having worked and covered in some capacity all of the major sports, the hockey guys are the most down to earth. They're the ones that seem most like you and I.
Yeah.
And I think that can only be good for this franchise.
This isn't to knock John Tortorella. I just think Rick Tocchet's probably going to be more personable
Yeah.
than John Tortorella. Tortorella's an old school head coach. He did things in a different way, very demanding, cut players' ice times, would have players come to his office if they wanted a one-on-one. I just think Tocchet is going to be different. And
And,
we've seen it from his days as an assistant coach and really as his days as a head coach.
yeah, and when you think about it too, he even brought up the need to, and I can't remember if he said it during the press conference. He definitely said it during our one-on-one, that the need to adapt to the current player. And again, we're not sitting here trying to trash John Tortorella, but I feel like that was one of the areas that was a bit of a struggle. And it's to no one's fault. I mean, guys are what they are. And John Tortorella was successful doing what he did. So this isn't to say this guy's way works and this guy's way doesn't work, but you did hear this. There was definitely a point to be made about the current player in the NHL and relating to the current player. And I think that is probably where Tocchet will excel the most.
He kind of reminds me a little bit of Keith Jones, but in a head coaching version. When Keith Jones was hired as president, everyone raved about how well connected he was within the league, and his connections from his playing days and his broadcasting days would go a long way. Seems like a lot of that is here in Tocchet. He was once on the TNT panel as a broadcaster. He obviously has played and coached, and he is just so well connected. I think that could really help. And Joe, if there's any concern about, well, will he be too lenient? Will some players eventually take advantage of him in that way? I don't get that concern because I think his playing career speaks volumes. What he's done as a coach speaks volumes. I think people will respect what he's done here in Philadelphia. Like, players will see, wow, Flyers Hall of Famer. While he may give me some leash, I better respect him in the same way. I just don't get the worry at all about, well, will he be too lenient, too different than John Tortorella? I think he's going to strike a good balance.
I do too, and I would even go beyond. Of course, his playing career is there's a lot of resume there. He played for a lot of teams, the Flyers twice. You've never found a guy to say anything bad about him. I mean, there are other. That's not that that's not that common. There's always somebody that seems to not like a person.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that about Talk, and I would even go so far as to say, if people are concerned about too lenient, just look at the situation he dealt with in Vancouver this past season. The two top forwards on the team seemingly just did not like each other. He coached through it. It came to a breaking point. They had to trade one of them, and he still almost led the team to the playoffs. And Quinn Hughes was hurt during a lot of that time, went down the stretch. So, I mean, it's not as if he hasn't dealt with anything coaching wise. I mean, yeah, in Arizona, there's not a ton of pressure to win. There's not a ton of expectation to win. That's not the case in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly not the case in Pittsburgh. And I know he wasn't the head coach, but I mean, working under Mike Sullivan, that's arguably the top coach of this generation. Yeah. And he came up under him. And so I have no concern about him being too lenient with anyone. So I mean, that's just not something that has entered my mind thinking about this. So I think there's also this narrative out there that his coaching style and Torts are similar. I know that has a lot to do with defensive style, but I mean, look at Vancouver's stats from the year he won the Jack Adams Award 2 seasons ago. I mean, that's not a defensive style team. They scored a lot of goals. I mean, so
I think he introduced structure there, but he still let them play.
Oh yeah. And I feel like there is and this is probably it's a bit of a hangover from Tortorella's tenure, is that there's this defensive means we can't score goals, which it doesn't. But you have to have players that score goals, and the Flyers are lacking in that department. Yeah. So I think this offseason you're going to see a big focus on that. So I mean, we'll see, but I have no concern that he'll be too lenient or too similar to Tortorella in terms of style. And I'm hoping he was very adamant over and over the other day that he believes there's potential here that hasn't been unlocked. I believe he used the word unleashed 7 or 8 times during the presser and our one-on-one. And I'm interested to see what he means by that and who he means by that, because he didn't really mention anybody by name. He just said he thinks there's stars in the making here.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see his plan on how to bring that out of these players he's referring to.
He listed things like the draft picks, the prospects. Like he clearly had a good read on what the Flyers are and
The
what
cap
their
space, he brought up
cap
the cap
space.
space.
Like you could tell, he wasn't just taking any job to take it. I don't think he was coming here just because it's Philadelphia and it's the Flyers. I think he actually liked the ingredients here. And I've had a lot of people ask me, well, how much better will they be in year one? I think it's going to really rely heavily on what Danny Briere does to the roster. But Tocchet does seem like he likes some of the things that are already in house.
Yeah, I mean, if you ran the same team they had at the last game of the season out here with Tocchet next year, I would say it's probably not going to be that much better.
Likewise, yeah.
But you can make the same argument every team in the NHL.
Yeah.
It comes down to personnel. I mean, if your group of 12 forwards has 9 guys that are all second line or below, you're not going to be a high scoring team. You're not going to be you're going to be what the Flyers are.
Yeah.
If your goaltending allows 4 or 5 goals a game, you're going to be what the Flyers are. And that is not necessarily coaching. That is personnel.
Yeah.
And the Flyers have made it very clear that this seems to be year one of flexibility in this rebuild plan, where they actually have moves they can go out and make and money they can go out and spend. And that's going to increase after next season. So the time's now to start building this roster into what you want it to be, because I think you have some young players and now you need to blend them with veteran free agents. And I mean, Rick Tocchet flat out said on Friday, they want a star player and they're going to go out and find a star player. They told me that. That's what he said to us.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that to be extremely interesting.
Yeah, I think the time is now for them to push this into another gear. If you just connect all the dots, they have their hand-picked head coach. They've gone through 2 years of subtracting and rebuild type of moves. Now I think is where they want to add a little bit and try to get better. They have to.
Yeah, it does almost feel like now that they have their coach in place, now this is when this regime really starts to kick in.
Yeah.
Outside of some of the players, there's not really anything left over from the previous. I know Tortorella was here 1 year, but before that, Alain Vigneault and Chuck Fletcher, and there's not really a ton of remnants from that. So, the time is now. There's no better way to say it other than that.
Joe, I found it very interesting that the part of Tocchet's resume that really opened Briere's eyes was Tocchet's time in Arizona. And that's actually, in the public eye, what gets him criticized the most is what he did in Arizona and how Coyotes never really turned into anything. But I think low-key, he did some really good things there. What did you think of Briere really pointing out that, hey, in Arizona, his teams were competitive in a market that was really challenging?
Yeah, I think part of the issue is people don't pay attention to Arizona. They assume they're bad because it's Arizona. If you watched and you paid attention, look at some of the players around the league that came from Tocchet in Arizona. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, going on to be a really successful player. Guys that are with Utah now, Nick Schmaltz, really successful player that developed under Tocchet. He worked with Logan Cooley, a lot of young players that learned how to play under Rick Tocchet. And I think there's this, they didn't really go anywhere. So they won a playoff round in the bubble, the Western Conference bubble. Like I said, they went and they acquired Phil Kessel. Like, you would never hear that about Arizona, probably not since the days when Arizona went and got him at the end of his career, or Jeremy Roenick at the end of his career. They would go out and get these big names at the end to kind of put a team on the ice that people knew. And they didn't do it for a long period of time. And then they started to do it again. And Tocchet was part of all that. And those players, I mean, the players I just listed and more beyond that. They really kind of found their place in the league under Tocchet. And I think that's what Danny's talking about. And I think the people that say that who criticize him for that just aren't looking at they're not paying attention.
Yeah, it's very easy to say, well, he's only going to the playoffs twice in his career. Well, like 4 of the years we're in Arizona, try to have some context there of what he went through in Arizona, and the team actually got better.
And it's not like that team was going in the offseason saying, we're going to go spend a ton of money.
Yeah.
They were playing retread goaltenders that have come from other teams. They were hoping that their prospects kind of blossomed into something, which a lot of them did under Tocchet. Oliver Ekman-Larsson was a player that was so highly regarded when he got drafted. And I feel like in the beginning of his career, he struggled to live up to that because there was no structure in place there. And then Tocchet goes there and he not only excels there, but has gone on to other teams now and really been a contributing factor. And I use a player what we were talking about earlier about him kind of bringing guys here. I'm trying to think of the Chicago defenseman that was there for the Cup teams that decided to sign as a free agent in Arizona when Toc was there. Hjalmarsson. That's the kind of thing where Hjalmarsson, Kessel, these are guys, they went there, and I'm guessing Tocchet had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So I think he can bring that here, absolutely.
And I think the Flyers are just really intrigued to see what he can do in an organization with more resources. And that's just a fact. The Flyers, whether people want to admit it or not right now, given they've been through a playoff drought and they're trying to get back to where they want to be and belong, they do have a lot of resources. It's a big market. Keith Jones said ownership is willing to spend to the limit. The practice facility is high end. They have an arena that just got renovated recently. It's a market with a passionate fan base, and I think they feel like Tocchet's going to have way more at his fingertips than he did in Arizona and some other stops. Even in Vancouver, Vancouver doesn't have a practice facility, and that reportedly bothered Tocchet. And Tocchet even mentioned in his press conference, he's like, "Wow, a practice facility with 3 sheets of ice." He was like, "Oh my god." You can tell there's more here, and I think the Flyers believe he can do a lot with it. And I'm intrigued. It might be one of the biggest challenges of his career, but he might be in one of the more advantageous spots of his career in terms of coaching, because I think there's a lot here he can do with.
And the other thing I would say is the Arizona job, they had that whole thing going on with their arena out there while he was there. Then he took over for Vancouver in the middle of that fiasco with Bruce Boudreau, where the first few games he's coaching, the fans are all chanting Boudreau's name. So it's almost like you're behind the 8 ball to start. Mm-hmm. In a market where there's a lot of pressure. And from an outsider's point of view, a lot of irrational pressure in that Vancouver market. And then, so when he comes here, he's fully embraced, and it's a place he has history with. And the opening press conference, the GM says, "This is our long-term solution." How many times do you hear that when a coach is, you don't really hear that kind of vote of confidence. It's almost as if to say, we're going forward and the coach is not the problem anymore. We're not going to accept that the coach is the problem anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good.
Yeah, I think that was Briere also giving a little leash to Tocchet in terms of, hey, guys, he's not brought in to make the playoffs right away. Like, I think they're going to be patient with Tocchet. Mm-hmm. They have to be. This is their handpicked guy. And I'm not sure Briere even wants, I don't think he's going to be demanding a playoff berth next season.
No.
They're going to be patient with it. I think they feel like they can get better, and Briere will have a lot to do with that in terms of personnel. And I think they want Tocchet to coach the team to be better, of course. But I really don't think there's going to be a pressure of Tocchet, we need to be in the playoffs. We need to be contending now. I think they're going to be patient with him. I think the biggest question will be how patient will fans be?
Well, what did the first thing Danny said at his press conference Friday was I want to make clear the message doesn't change.
Right.
And here's the message is, and has been part of it at least, is we are not sacrificing the future to get into the last playoff spot. So I don't think there will be let's make the playoffs, just get in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of trouble in this town lately with guys just trying to get in the playoffs. Daryl Morey admitted it was a problem with the Sixers. Just getting into the playoffs. I know in hockey, the old thing is if you get in, you have a chance.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm not sure that in the current state of hockey, that's true. Because if you look at the teams that are the final teams in the playoffs the last few years, you're not finding 8 seeds that are in there.
Yeah.
You need to be of a certain caliber. And of course, you can get a hot goalie and all that. And we know teams have won the Stanley Cup as an 8th seed. But the goal is not to be the 8th seed. Mm-hmm. It's to be a more established playoff team and one that can do it year after year. And I thought it was interesting that Danny felt the need to point that out. Goes right along the lines with what you were saying about having a leash.
And I think
some leeway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think the Flyers really wanted to make it clear they hired him because they felt for various reasons he was qualified. It wasn't to sell tickets. I had been writing that I thought it'd be a good optics move for a while because I think he would put butts in seats, but they were like,
it can be a good optics move, right. And it is a good optics move.
Yeah.
But I don't know I know you and I were both in the scrum with Jonesy, and I don't know if you had gotten there yet when I asked him about how much is this not just about on the ice, but it's about people.
Yeah.
It's about relatable people that make other people enjoy being part of this organization. And he's like, and his answer was flat out, it's not as much as you think.
Yeah.
He is not here to sell tickets. Just what you said.
Yeah.
And I think that is not the messaging that was necessarily put out there when these two first took over. I think it's now they're making it clear, Tocchet's a great guy and it looks good for the organization. And he's a legendary Flyer, but this is not about, reliving the glory days of the 80s or the 70s or all the things that the people that are saying that it's the same old Flyers hiring old Flyers are talking about. It's not that. This is way bigger than that. And I asked Dan Hilferty about that Friday, and he said the status in the league, and Tocchet even brought it up. He's been gone 2 decades plus, 2.5 decades. Yeah. It's not like he's, I've said this on this podcast before. The same old Flyers narrative, I believe when it gets talked about, the basis of it is the 70s guys. And I'm talking, it's nothing against these guys, but when you look around, even to this day, Bob Clark, Bill Barber, Bernie Perrant, Bob Kelly just retired from the organization. The thing with these guys is they never left. Mm-hmm. They've been here the whole time. They've been running things behind the scenes. Paul Holmgren. It's a narrative that, to me, unfairly gets spread out to the entire alumni base of the team, but it's really only based on the 70s guys because that was the last time they won cups. So I don't think this at all. And his stature in the league goes way beyond what he did as a player with the Flyers.
And one thing I'll say about the former Flyer thing, hiring a former Flyer is almost like having an internship program at a regular place of work. Like, you have an intern, you get to know them, and you have a better understanding of who they are compared to maybe someone outside. So just naturally, it creates a stepping stone for okay, well, next up is hiring them. It's natural, I think, in all organizations to hire people that maybe used to play there or be there before.
Look at the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Yzerman's their
everywhere.
GM.
Yeah.
He was the captain of their dynasty run. Now, it was a dynasty run. But what I would argue is the Flyers in the 80s, if not for the Oilers, could have been their own dynasty. Mm. And I've said that before. And Tocchet was a big part of that. He was raised in this organization. And then he came back and he played for the 2000 team, which by all accounts, and every person I've ever talked to that played for that team talked about that was the tightest locker room that they ever played for or played in. And so I think the whole former Flyer thing is kind of, it's not all nonsense, but it's mostly nonsense.
Yeah, and I don't want to put it on like the whole fan base. I think it's like a small section and a very
Mhm.
loud section that tends to be online or maybe doesn't follow as closely, that when they just see Tocchet, they think, well, he played here. And
Mhm.
of course they're doing that. I think a lot of those people maybe don't even know exactly what he's done or how long he's been gone.
No, they don't. And I've gotten it a lot over the weekend, seeing people,
Yeah.
friends, family members, and so forth, where I got like, "Oh, you can't give an honest opinion on this. You love Toc."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, but
Yeah.
I can be objective about it. I
Yep.
mean, he is not the group that people are talking about.
Right.
They're referring. I'll give you an example of what the perfect example of what they're referring to. Bill Barber was hired as the head coach of this team in the late 90s. They had a lot of names that were past their prime. They got more names that were past their prime in that season, and they severely underachieved. And that's what people are talking about. And Bill Barber he didn't have other coaching jobs. He coached them in the minors, he coached the Phantoms,
Yeah.
but he didn't he wasn't a sought after coach, is what I'm saying. So I think people look at that and they're like, oh, well, they think the organization just hands out jobs to guys
Right.
that wore the jersey one time. It's just simply not the case.
Right. If Tocchet was like recently retired and he spent like 1 or 2 years as an assistant here, and then all of a sudden he had the head coaching job, I would probably agree. Like, oh, well, it's a little interesting. I probably would have looked
But you
elsewhere.
can make the same
But
argument about Pittsburgh. And
yeah,
he did play, that would have made sense. They
right,
needed a coach.
right,
He was an assistant there for Stanley Cup runs.
right.
So that's the whole thing is he has there's so many ties to other organizations, and the people, the same old Flyers narrative kind of looks at guys who have always been this organization and really haven't gone anywhere else. So I just think it all gets unfairly lumped together. And I think he thinks the same thing because, I mean, if you saw him Friday, now him getting defensive is a lot more tame than anyone else getting defensive, but like he seemed to get a little defensive about the other teams he's been involved with and how long he's been going. Like it was clearly something that he knew he was going to get asked.
Yeah,
So I think people need to just calm down with that kind of stuff.
agreed. And according to reports, other teams were interested in Tocchet too. So again, it's not like this is a guy that is strictly a former Flyer and nobody
Right.
else
And
wanted him.
people are going to find stuff to complain about because if you think about it, they complained that, they complained that Ron Hextall let Craig Berube go and Berube went and run a cup. Last time I checked, he's a former Flyer.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
no one, you know what I mean? Everybody's, oh, they made a mistake letting him go so they could hire a college coach, which if you look at the situation, they did. But that was a former Flyer too. So if they kept him, would everybody complain about that?
yeah.
Probably not.
And I need to kind of hear from people that don't like him, which is fine. Like they're entitled to their opinion, but who did you want instead? And it
Right.
seems like a lot of those people don't actually have a candidate that they wanted, and they're just saying they don't want Tocchet because he's a former Flyer or whatever reason. Like, all right,
If
well,
you
who
were
did
to
you want instead? So
if you were to come out and say, I wanted the Flyers to go get Mike Sullivan, totally legit, right?
yeah,
But it was about 30 seconds after he left Pittsburgh
that
that
he
he
was
got
going to
hired
be
by the
here. Yeah,
Rangers. And it
yeah,
seemed a foregone conclusion.
yep.
There wasn't even any other teams mentioned. Outside of that argument, I'm not sure who else you could have possibly wanted.
And Briere actually said in a scrum setting after the press conference that as far as deep interviews, guys they really seriously considered, they had 7 candidates, which I think is pretty legit. Like it wasn't like it was just Tocchet and only Tocchet.
Mhm.
It seemed like they looked elsewhere. They were thinking of various routes. I don't think they rushed this, which I think is a good thing.
No, and they definitely indicated that they had to
Convinced Tocchet.
really work to get him, to
Yep.
convince him. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, let's be real. He has a great gig in TV. They're waiting for him, and he
A great
enjoys
gig
it.
in TV or
Another job.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Again, you know, people a lot of times I feel like the fan base, and not just with the Flyers, but recently, probably a little more with the Flyers, views their situation in a vacuum.
Mhm.
The same thing could be said for Pittsburgh. I mean, do you think people in Pittsburgh are like, oh, they're going to bring back a former Penguin? No.
Mhm.
Now they won cups, but I just think because he played for the Flyers as part of his huge resume in hockey does not mean that should be discounted.
Agreed. He deserves a shot, and I mean, he did just win Coach of the Year a
Yeah.
season ago. It's tough to complain about getting a guy that just won the Jack Adams a year ago. We'll see where it all goes with Rick Tocchet, but I think a big chapter here ahead for the Flyers. They have their coach, Briere Jones, their handpicked guy, and a busy offseason now awaits. So we'll have it all covered here on the Flyers Talk podcast. Joe Fordyce, thank you so much, as always, for joining me. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru. And Flyers fans, as always, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.